No, but but Barber came in clutch.
Absolutely clutch. He came in on a Sunday, no less. Is that right? Or Monday?
No, so he didn't come on Monday. So I had to call him on Saturday, like in a panic. Kira's on the couch. I was like, "Hey, can you squeeze me in today?" He's like, "Oh, I'm actually off this weekend. But text me when you find out about your flight, and then we'll work around. I'll just meet you at the shop." And so he opened it up on a Monday, and it closed on Mondays generally. He was had a day off. He was like chilling, and I told him what time my flight was. He was like, "Okay, come in Monday morning," and I just remember the shop Monday morning to give me a haircut.
How much of a tip?
I gave him $20 tip.
Support black business.
And the thing is, he didn't even charge me just when he comes in on his days off, because he does do that for people. Like he charges like 60. It's just 70 for that, because he's like, "This is my day with my kids and my wife. And I'm coming in to spend 45 minutes cutting your hair." But he's like, "No, we'll keep it the same, like 27." And I was like, "No, you're taking 50, and you're gonna like it."
Bro, that relationship with the barber is critical. You gotta find the right one.
You had James Tootle in Newport News.
My fucking guy. Shout out to James Tootle if you're listening to this.
6'7", not just a clever name.
Oh my God.
Actually that tall. Former hooper.
You get back problems.
Now I got my guy Victor at the Barber Lounge. Shout out to him. Going to see him today.
The boy Anthony's he's got his lesbian chick. It's because they share a taste in flannel shirts.
He doesn't just use like a machete and just give it a once over.
No. Yeah, right. All right. So,
machete in the mirror.
We've alluded to it. So what you were getting a lineup for was the job interview that you had Monday, Tuesday. Let's go back a week before that and tell the people what happened.
Yeah, so before that, I don't know what day that was, but got let go from my
Monday, right?
Yeah, it was on Monday. Yeah, that not formal job at the women's soccer team. I mean, it is what it is. I love working with the players. Some of the staff, like the AT, goalkeeper coach, midfield coach, we got along great, had a relationship. We did a lot of good things. I think I went back and looked at numbers. It was 98% of the team ran the fastest time ever, and some of them are in the mid 30s of age wise, and a kid or two later, and still hitting PBs on speed. But from the physical side, we were more than prepared and more what we wanted to do than even how I kind of expected. I was just because of the stress on the technical tactical side was just so high, especially it's been 10 weeks with our lowest training week being 23K, 24K is our lowest training week in a 10-week preseason.
Which in rugby, that would probably be the highest. A 23K week is pretty high for rugby.
Yeah, our highest week in that preseason was 44.
Yeah, pretty.
Yeah, it was Aussie rules football type of load.
Bro, I think the worst case scenario I mapped for women's college soccer was I went 20% over what I estimated to be the peak, and that was 48,000 yards that I estimated.
So that was at 40K.
Yeah.
Which is fucking nuts. So talk me through the firing.
It was pretty straightforward. Some of it is that I'm naturally not a extremely expressive, emotional person anyway. So it was just we're gonna let you go. And I just kind of left it as I was okay. At that point, I mean, we've all been in this position on this call. I'm sure most SEC coaches, if they coach for any appreciable time, have been in this position. There's no point in arguing. The decision's been made, and in my case, the decision was made weeks ago.
Yeah, Ollie Richardson in Japan made the playoffs and got fired.
Yeah, so it's it's nature of the beast. So there's no point in you can be upset, and I was upset and annoyed about it, because obviously your ego takes a hit initially, naturally, because you always think you do a good job, but then you almost get to reset and reminded that hey, as the SEC coach, that's your limiting factor, is that you're the SEC coach. You don't make the you're not the decision maker. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably what you see guys like Alejo who reach out. So shout out to Uncle Bob Alejo.
OG.
always says about like more assistant coaches needing to get in higher positions where they become decision makers, and not necessarily. And I think in the college sector doesn't necessarily mean becoming a sport coach. In the professional sector, that probably means becoming like a VP, an assistant GM. I remember there was one coach at the Astros who's like his end goal. He was getting an MBA because his end goal because he wanted to be an assistant GM. And like whether he gets there or not, I don't know. But it was like an admirable goal in that sense. If he was like, I want to be an assistant GM, and I asked him why, and he was like, because I'm tired of people who don't know what we do, like telling me what I can and can't do.
That was Chris McCormick. Chris McCormick at FAU. He said, I want to be an AD.
Yeah. So he's like, so like those kind of things, I fully understand. And yeah, so there's no real like emotion about it. It's not being able to work with the players. So the players are a great group of people. So in December, they've all been in contact and reached out in some way.
Fair to say though that the decision was an emotional one, correct? Because we're not fit or strong enough. Based on what? Well, that's just how we feel.
Yeah, and that's a beauty. That's one of those things where like metrics matter until they don't matter.
Yeah.
So like, so it's just it is what it is. Like,
now
I was talking to my friend earlier this morning. I was like, now being like a little over a week now since this happened, I was like, I generally though feel way better. It's because like there was so many other issues going on.
Because you're not eating shit every day.
I mean, some of it's that, and like wake up. Oh yeah, I can do what I want to do today. Oh, whatever I want to do. And I just like that stress of like not being in a day to day, especially being in that environment as well. Like has been beneficial for me. So and it's one thing you don't recognize until you're out of it.
You know, fair to say that based on conversations that you and I had, I'm sure you had the same conversations with other people that we both know. Like when you first arrived, the writing was on the wall for you, not in terms of your job, but you're dealing with a fairly volatile, emotional coaching staff. Did you go through that process that we talked about of like paper trail, documentation, leaning heavily on the numbers, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's definitely like something that helped me a lot. And even though it didn't help me, obviously it helped me keep my job, it didn't matter. But yeah, it helps. I think some of it's a bit of like, maybe like ego padding a bit. It helps kind of it's almost like a self pat on the shoulder of like, you did all you could do given the constraints of the environment you were in. And are there lessons to be taken away from it? I think potentially there probably are somewhere in there, but like part of me, and it's gonna sound extremely arrogant. Like I fully am aware of that. Is that like
doesn't mean you're wrong.
Yeah, like don't really feel like there's any lesson I could take from what I had the last 7 months potentially. As far as like from dealing with not necessarily working on the player side or medical side, but like the managing upside that you have to do. Like, I don't know if there's any lesson that I've learned from that.
I honestly believe you can't manage up. I think you manage across or down. Because bro, that was me in Japan. I think you can have the illusion of managing upwards, but really all you're doing is you're just being a politician or you're kowtowing to give them what they want.
Yeah, and it comes with a lot of hope involved. Like you're hoping with like the education factors you're trying to put in, or like trying to educate coaches or front office or whatever will have an impact on their decisions. But like at the end of the day, you're not really managing it because you have no idea if it's done it to you or not.
Yeah. Mate, I mean, me and Scott had a meeting like that once where, they're not fit enough. Well, okay, based on what? I was like, right, what is the evaluation of their fitness that Scott is in control of? And the answer was the 30-15. I was like, have their numbers stayed the same or improved? Yes, they have. Well, okay, then. It's not Scott's fault.
And then it was also the trimp scores during games decreased as the season went on. Yeah. So the game's physiologically
the game was getting easier.
Yeah. As I said in that meeting too, we spent the last game with our right wing in the middle of the field. So we had no horizontal stretch on the field and we wondered why we couldn't clear it out of our half. It's like, I'm not responsible for the players having the tactical awareness of where they're positioned on the field and how if they're out of position, it inhibits our ability to move the ball up the field because they're getting no stretch on the rest of the field. That's not my doing. You're
building a car. You're responsible for the cup holder. You're like, why did the car fucking crash? Nah, listen, man, it's one of those things where I think you're going to get the full spectrum in your career where at times you've just experienced it. Like you can have the world's best program, but if the other areas are not going well, you're going to look like the world's worst coach. And then you can have other times where like, I'm certainly a better coach than I was 5 or 6 years ago, but my boys were playing so well that they appeared fit, that I looked flavor of the month and got recruited to go to Japan, all that bullshit. So yeah, man. So, all right. Job interview. You mentioned, I think just off air, you probably had 10 job interviews in the last year. So fair to say that this is not something that you planned on, but it's, seeds that you planted before you needed them bearing fruit, right?
Yeah. Actually, yeah, pretty much. And like, I've probably had somewhere upwards of 10 in the last 18 months or so. Yeah. And it's all just, and there's always like the natural knock when you see my CV. They're like, oh, he's had a million sports, more sports and t-shirts, like bounced around a lot. But I try to always make moves that make logical sense, at least in my mind, from a career perspective. Whether it be ways,
it can be spun both ways.
Yeah, and like so I just kind of saw it as, hey, this is what it is. And for me, like the actual interviews itself don't bother me anyway, because it's just, in the day, it's a conversation. And I think it was you that told me this, of like, see interviews as like, they're not only interviewing you, but you're interviewing them to see if it's even going to be like.
Well, if you don't, you can pay the price when you work there, and you're like, fuck, why didn't I, pick up on this?
Yeah, 100%. And like knowing the right questions to ask, because sometimes the right questions aren't necessarily technical questions that you ask them, but sometimes it's more the questions of like, do you feel, especially when you can ask like staff. So if you can ask staff and not just supervisors, you can ask staff of like, hey, what do you feel like you have clear roles and responsibilities? That's always a good question. Like quite telling, do people say no or not? Do you feel like it goes along with clear roles and responsibilities, like expectations are like understood by
what you're going to be evaluated on, what KPIs.
Having like asking what the projection is for not only your position, but the club or the organization 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Even if maybe you personally don't plan on being there for 5 years, it's like, it's good to know that there's a plan. Like
it's also in the interest of the organization that the really good organizations, there's that continuation where one person can pick up on the work left by another individual and continue on. Like, I could be wrong, but my feeling is at Indiana football, for example, that's happened to an extent. I don't feel like Cam and Aaron went in and they completely started from scratch. It feels like there was momentum made under the two doctors, and then they've kind of like continued with that and improved even more.
Yeah. And then that was something like I learned when I presented at Barcelona, was like, I remember talking to their head S&C.
Can I just pick up that name you just dropped there, bro?
That win. So someone asked them like, how do you guys go about dealing with, because obviously it's Barcelona, so they've had some manager changes here in the last like decade, but most managers stay for a little while because it is Barcelona. And he said when they're deciding on what manager they bring in, there's so many people involved in the process that not only from like the ownership level, but also even his level. But he's like, because there's a set he said it's not a hard and fast philosophy of what it is, but it is like, they call it the Barcelona way of someone else from the processes. And like, he's like, doesn't work long term if every time I bring in a new manager, everything gets thrown away. He's like, because in reality, that's how you get stuck in these clubs who do really good for 3 years and then they're back in the tank, as opposed to like staying relatively top 3 and be one of the best footballing countries in the world of Spain. It's like, you're obviously doing something right. And you had multiple managers.
I feel like for that,
Real Madrid.
You either have to have certain key individuals in place for a very, very long time, or there needs to be that clear overlap between them where like, hey, you're going to do 5 years, but you're also going to spend 2 years grooming your successor to like keep that, like you said, the mission going. Yeah. I feel like that's something like, for all the, we did a lot wrong, but for all the good that me, Eric, and Scott did, it's evaporated now. Because there wasn't, it ended so quickly. It's like, done. Do you feel like your, you know, just to circle back, like you mentioned with that kind of conversational style of interviewing, having sat on the other side, like as well as, you know, Scott has, it's one of those things as well where, because people go into it with a set format in their head of how it's supposed to feel, how the interaction is supposed to go, when you do actually strike a conversational tone, it also stands out from the crowd and it puts the other people at ease. And ultimately, I feel like that comfort and ease around people is one of the things that makes someone appealing to work with as well. The sooner you can break that down, obviously not to be like super informal, I know you get that, but not to be super informal, but certainly to make people feel comfortable. That's, you know, a positive thing. Now, is that something that you mentioned, you know, 10 interviews in 18 months? Do you feel that's something that you become more comfortable with in time? Because I could be hindsight 2020. My feeling was that you were more nervous when you interviewed for the Astros than you were this week.
Yeah, I think some of it comes from, I'm being honest, I think over time, but also where I'm currently at in my career as opposed to where I was, I don't know, that's 4 years ago, something like that, 5 years ago, like opposed
because I was at Richmond.
Oh yeah, so as opposed to going into like the Astros one, because the Astros one, I was coming from a place of desperation, really, because at that point I had applied for probably like 70 jobs back in the US, and my visa was expiring in the UK. And like it was just a plethora of no's. I mean, it's a lot had to do with the fact that like I didn't have any connections really in the US. Like I had done one internship in the US, and everything else, and all my work had been in Japan and the UK, which like from a practitioner point of view helped me a ton. From like the way SEC goes and networking point
you
of view.
You are looking at the proof that an international network means fucking nothing in America.
And so I was definitely more nervous going into that. I think that probably prepared me in a lot of ways, because that was like a 4-week process. It was a different task every week, and it was a presentation week 1.
This is with Dan.
Yeah, a coaching video week 2. I coached linear and lateral speed, and it was very strict, like, and in a very Dan Howe's way. There are very distinct directions of each task too about how to do them. And like if you mess up on one, so if your slides were 10 slides instead of 9, including like a cover, a title, whatever. Like if you had 10 slides of title one, you were immediately thrown away.
That's the Van Halen brown M&Ms in a brandy glass thing. You ever heard about that? Where it was like so you know in Wayne's World 2, he always talks about, he wants 10,000 brown M&Ms in a brandy glass who wouldn't go on stage that night. That was actually a real thing by Van Halen in the 80s. And what it was a spot check, because they would have all this scaffolding, pyro, basically their stage show, just setting it up. People could, you know, get crushed or killed or whatever. And they knew that if you couldn't read the contract enough to, hey, we want fucking 10,000 brown M&Ms in a brandy glass, how can you be trusted to make shit explode and not burn anyone? So that was like their spot check. So it's like, you know, I'm sure, you know, similar thing for Housey. It's like, hey, this is a big job for a big organization. You want to know that people have attention to detail. If I ask for 10 and you give me 9, well, can you be trusted to go work with Justin Verlander, for example?
Yeah. So it was after that, it was like 9 slides at first. Then it was no more, no less, 10-minute video. You coaching linear and lateral speed. And it has to be of you coaching like an athlete. It's not you performing the moves, because I don't care. Yeah. Then it was like that company Hire Vu. And so it's an audio video recording of you answering questions. So a question pops up, you got 3 minutes to answer, and I had 10 of those. So it's 30 minutes long. And you feel like an idiot, because you're staring at yourself, talking to yourself, basically, kind of answering the question. And it's like
I bet you TVA didn't feel like that.
Just a dead stare, no blinking in 30 minutes. Yeah. And then week 4 was phone call with what was the title? I think his title was Director of Health and Sport Performance, something like that. But he's also like an assistant GM, I think, as well, or associate GM. Phone call with him, like 30, 45 minutes, and that was more like a personality fit kind of check. And then because he didn't come from like a technical S&C or medical background. And then it was a Skype interview before everyone hopped on Zoom. People still use Skype. So a Skype interview with Dan House, Jose, Dan's sports scientist, and then Taylor, Dan's assistant. Time. And that was like the last thing. Now, yeah, that was week 4 of like.
I feel like I'm not sure if it's just like a good fortune, but one of the things that struck me, like when I interviewed with Tappers, is it's funny. Like you talked about desperation. When I eventually got an internship with Tappers, it wasn't really that, you know, oh fucking hell, I'm ready and blah 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 blah. Like I had just failed that many times that I was like, I did not give a fuck at that point. I was like, let's just fucking get this over with. Like, that's an interview. But that was one thing. Like Tappers put me through the fucking ringer. Like for an unpaid internship for an academy, he made me interview all day, and it was like turn up, coach a session, have lunch. You're really still being interviewed. Coach another session, and then he's like, "Oh, you got the internship. The boys are in at 3:30. We're coaching for 2 hours." And I'm like, "What the fuck?" And so I was there like 10 hours. But that was one thing that I tried to take from him, even when I had, you know, I was hiring interns 2 years later. It's like he always said, coach them over, interview them over a long period, because they cannot keep their guard up that long. You're going to see the longer it goes on, the more you're going to see, and take people out of the gym. All strength coaches are comfortable in the gym, put them under pressure outside in different situations to do that. And, you know, having that like evolved over time, we used to come up with some fucking horrible questions like in Japan. And then me and Scott at William & Mary, we used to ask them like fucking horrible questions just to see, to almost like the pressure exposes what you want to see.
Yeah.
If you always have that polish and, oh, you know, people say I work too hard and blah 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 blah. It's like, no, you're not actually seeing what you want to see.
Who are your mentors question? It's like, oh, okay, great.
Yeah. And
dude, that was like the one we went through with Tall Alex and Mustache Alex.
I was just about to say that. So Bridgessi said, he goes, "Oh, after the interview I did with you guys, it was easy because I'd been interviewed by Tappers. I'd obviously learned from Dan. Interviewed you in Japan and learned from that. And then me and Scott started to put some shit together. And then Eric went off and tried to do some military job. And he said they put him through the fucking ringer for 2 days. Like 2 days. So he comes back with like all this shit about how we can like commit psychological warfare on aspiring coaches. So Tall Alex, I don't know if I told you this. Tall Alex and Mustache Alex, we narrowed it down. Tall Alex, he didn't have the background, but like you could see the shit that he was trying to do just with club volleyball. It was like awesome, this thought process and stuff like that. And then with this other guy from USOC.
Also, Tall Alex tagged us in Fritter Friday, to be clear. So
he was tagging us in Fritter Friday for a solid year before we hired him. So anyway, Eric's like, let's bring them in at the same time and not tell them that they're competing. So we invited them and we flew them in, didn't tell them that they were both interviewing on the same day. And then this is a terrible introduction. They got picked up with a boy Anthony and his Kia. They were both there. I'm like, who the fuck are you? And it's like, you'll be interviewing as a pair. And then
just with a machete in his back.
Yeah. And, we took him to first watch, because that's the thing as well. It's like, you want to put people under pressure, I feel like, but then you also want, can you still be polite to people and can you still be friendly? So it's like, you're going to compete against this guy, but can you have breakfast with him and be a nice person? And of course, the answer was yes for both of them. Then it was, we got
him on the whiteboard.
Yeah,
got him on the whiteboard with, they had to outline RTP and then defend it to the entire sports med plus our performance staff.
Yes.
And they were writing on like opposite sides. So they had like the same dual-sided whiteboard.
Yeah, we had a big whiteboard on opposite sides. And the thing is, like,
was there a time limit?
Yeah, hell yeah. Like 30 minutes?
Yeah, I think we gave them like 20 minutes tops, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe it was, I think we were there roughly now. So it's like, oh, you're going to have 20 minutes. And then I think there was like 10 minutes of like, oh, would you like to change anything? Plant the seed. And then it was like, then it was maybe, but you're also asking one of the questions. So Tall Alex is going to ask questions of Mustache Alex, like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And then vice versa. Then we put them in another situation in the afternoon where...
Then I took them to lunch, made them sit on the same side of the table next to each other at Paul's Deli.
Yeah.
And then we brought him back and we did they had to outline a preseason for field hockey.
And we're like, neither of them have worked with hockey, so we're putting them outside their comfort zone, pick another sport, all that kind of stuff. Then we all trained as a group, all that kind of stuff. So,
well, and then we put them through the absolutely shoot all the holes and everything between.
Yeah,
like they got the Eric Corum stare of like, why would you do that? And just being made to feel empty on the inside because you have no good answer. Bro, that shit hurt.
I mean,
I got that
you told me. You told me on Monday that you felt like not under pressure, but having a difficult question put to you. You mentioned to me like, how do you know this works if you're never around long enough to see it work and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There is, I guess, you can say there's some validity to a question like that, but I felt like from what we talked about, you handled it well, right? You won't be like, oh, how dare you?
Yeah, I think that was the first time I had gotten that question, which I was kind of surprised about because that was a question I would have expected sooner. I think, like as far as like in my career, like interviews, stuff like that. So I wasn't too surprised by it, but yeah, it was a really good question. I was like, fuck. But it's funny you say about
David Joyce did that to me, right?
Yeah, he did.
Why is it whenever you don't get your way, you leave? It's like, God damn. I wouldn't characterize it quite like that. I just said to him, I was like, look, every time I've left a team in the last year, I've left with their blessing and they've asked me to come back. Apart from Sydney Roosters, who can go fuck themselves. Continue.
It's more said, I think another thing that made me that I thought was really, that I was comfortable with like the conversation interview part was, I think I was comfortable in that side of it earlier in my career. So even like the internship, I think after the internship with you, after that interview process, and the question of what would people who don't like you say about you? And I think after that question, it made me very comfortable for any other like speaking interview and have to speak to someone. Like that's become maybe quite easy. And those are questions I even put like I said everyone should have on the interview process because you quickly find out if someone has a bit of delusion. Yeah. You find out quickly like, oh, I work too hard. I care too much. Just like, oh, great.
That's when I ever had it. Was like, oh, I am a hard-headed, stubborn, arrogant cunt.
Was that JJ?
No, I was an Irish guy. I didn't interview JJ because he had been a client of mine, and I obviously knew Steph. So I actually wanted to insulate myself from that a little bit. And Scott did his interview, and he was like, "Yeah, hire him."
The math on him, and now look at him,
an absolute gunner. Probably a life expectancy down a few years, but an absolute gunner.
A big one you see, it's almost like advice for most people in terms of interviews, is that just about every interview I've done now, I've had, especially for when you get like more assistant SNC roles, head SNC roles, like they're always gonna ask some kind of task of you. And so whether it be a presentation, I think for the job I just got let go from, I had to, this was a big task to ask me to do in 36 hours, but they asked for an entire year periodization. Like with zero schedule. There was no game schedule yet out, no preseason mapped out. So I was like,
supposed to work backwards from.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. And they were just like, just give us a general themes and idea. And I was like, yeah, but it's hard to even give that when you have zero. So that's something you have to kind of be prepared for. It's good to have like some basis of stuff already created that you can then just iterate for that goal and for that job. Like even the one of the presentation I did most recently, like if I don't get this job, like I'll still keep that same framework and just like change it up as necessary for the next one. For the most part, there'll be some details you change here and there based on the position, but for the most part, like a lot of things you keep the same.
Do you feel like there were gaps that got exposed in the interview for that presentation, or do you feel like you were well prepared with it?
I think because of changes I made the night before, so I didn't realize it until the next day. Like when I looked at it again in the morning, I was like, oh, I actually added another like 7 slides to it. So I just went in greater detail, and I think want to help us have a brain trust of people to you. Like we'll send stuff to, who will pick your shit apart.
Strength Coach Network.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'll post mine on Strength Coach Network so people can see it as an example of like, hey, this is what I did. I make stuff in Canva, so I like making presentations in Canva, but do it however you want. But so yeah, I think I sent mine to Jay, you, Zach, Lima, DeMarco, a couple other. Like I sent it to
I looked at it too.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I sent it to like 10 people. Frank, and I was just like, hey, like I sent the first copy, which was like the one I sent on Sunday night, I think. And then I sent the revamped copy like Monday night at like 11 o'clock at night on Pacific time. and so I think that's not a big one. Like knowing having a framework, if they don't give you hard guidelines, like the Astros gave me like hard guidelines of what they wanted. So then obviously follow those specific details and fill those gaps as much as you can. But they don't give you like a hard framework to work off of. Then like open up a bit, be able to zoom out. Don't just focus on one specific. Don't just focus on strength conditioning. Like be able to zoom out.
Yeah, like, I was telling you, like to me, the challenge with those is the ability to like zoom in and zoom out because everyone in that room is always going to want to go down a rabbit hole that's like their area.
Yeah.
So that, you know, depending on who you talk to, like if you're talking to an administrator or a GM or something, they're going to want to talk at the organizational level.
Yeah.
ATC wants to talk about return to play or all that kind of stuff. And that's, I feel like that framework of the presentation, you have to hit all those things, but then you also have to be prepared to go down a rabbit hole if they want.
Yeah. It helps have examples of some work you've done. Like I put in a screenshot of a periodization we used that I made before. So I put that in there and I started talking about like periodization and scheduling and trying to figure out how to plan for the knowns and then have some plan for the unknowns. Like, so I put that in there, put a screen capture of what that kind of looked like and talked about how you can change it for the nature of the sport and the schedule and all this shit. I put an example of like return to play and my kind of process in there. Like this to show a collaboration between the medical staff and performance side and how it's like imperative to a good process in return to play. I put an example of like a program, general like two times a week in season kind of program. That was like super basic and non-specific in any way. So it was just like to show like, hey, like here's my process of when it comes to program design and like this is why I do some of those things. This is why there's a Copenhagen in there. This is why there's a Soleil's calf raise. And like there were some things you change based on people's movement patterns and compensations. I don't use sport like basketball. You similar to even when it was when the soccer. Like I don't use trap bar. I probably wouldn't use any bilateral lift because I feel like you're losing a lot in that sense. I wouldn't use trap bar because you tend to use a lot of eccentric qualities in trap bar because most people tend to just drop it or they just go down fast and let it go. So I would use more like a single leg. This is why. And going on those kind of like little rabbit holes. So having some examples that become like light bulb moments for yourself to remind you what you want to talk about or what you're pointing across. And you almost you're trying to be predictive in a way too of like, what are the things they're going to ask you? They're going to ask you return to play, especially if medical staff is also in the presentation, which mine was. I had medical staff and the performance staff. So they're going to ask you return to play. They're going to ask, if you talk about periodization, they're going to ask you about periodization. And coming from working in soccer and rugby, they're even going to ask even more because it's not very common framework that's used in basketball. So having an example of that. We're going to probably ask you about gym. So if they didn't ask you too much really about like gym programming, because that's just kind of, end of the day, that's why basketball gym is important. Yeah, it's just like whatever.
What was your interview like in Arizona? I can't remember.
That was far and away the most confident I've ever been going into an interview. So I was actually going to kind of jump off of what TK was talking about with like having things ready. One of the things I did over the initial quarantine last year was like redoing my portfolio, and I redid it in Keynote so that it was like presentation style. And I did really, really comprehensively, like similar to what TK said, to where, you know, I started very, very high level with like, you know, fundamentally what is, you know, my belief, my training philosophy, what have you, diving into the weeds a little bit further, just overarching frameworks and structures that I work from in putting together physical preparation programs. And then started to dive a little bit more into the methodology, some of the systems I use, the way that I organize training and structure training. Dove in a bit more too, because I did put some stuff together for a potential head role somewhere.
I couldn't remember if you had an interview before that.
No, I didn't. I just had the one.
It's just going to be okay. Yeah.
And so I like had stuff for like, working with sports med, RTP, stuff like that. Working across with the football staff, getting into some of the tactical periodization pieces. And then I had like a segment where it's just basically like a profile of my work at the places I've been, the results I've gotten at each of those spots. And so now what it's allowed me to do and how it ended up serving me in my interview was that they wanted me to just do on a Zoom talk, basically, a quick presentation of myself, and I could go in, create a second copy of that full comprehensive plan, and then just delete out the slides that, I don't need to convey that message. So I ended up, it's like, all in all, I think it's like a 50 or 60 slide portfolio, but then I can curate it to who I'm interviewing for. So I put one together when I switched over to the Olympics.
Fucking 120 slide deal once, and I was like,
yes,
Zachary, come on, bro.
And so it was like, then when I interviewed on the Olympic side, I pulled out anything football. I did, yeah. I pulled out all the football stuff and I just focused on results I've gotten in Olympic sports. And now I have this very tailored, very curated representation of myself that I'm not having to redo every single time. And it stays very fundamentally true to who I am. And it's something that I've talked on so much that it's like second nature to me. And so like when I went into that interview with Arizona, that was the most confident I walked away, because the big way I reframed it to myself was like, it's a conversation about me, and everybody on this call is not nearly as well versed in me as I am. And so the fact that it was just a conversation, talk about who I am, what I've done, how I think, and then respond to whatever questions they have in the context of what I know and what I don't know. I remember I texted you right after, and I was like, if they don't hire me after that interview, I don't know what happened, but that was the best interview I ever had. And obviously I got the job and I'm here and probably got, it worked out real well.
I think that is a perfect time to wrap up and to tell everyone to go try Team Builder.
Guess who's about to buy Team Builder?
Arizona?
This guy.
Fuck yeah. It is very good. Literally, this is not prompted. You and I were having a conversation the other day about how Bridge Athletics sucks and they're not responsive, and that Team Builder is the glacial juggernaut, just progressing and iterating, moving forward. So good
doing
work.
Things for strength coaches, not doing it just because they were the first ones in the space.
Amen. Well, I, for one, look forward to taking credit for Terrance's success when he inevitably gets a job, and saying on Twitter, they got a good one.
Hey, yo.
And gang. Cheers, boys.
Yeah, gang.